welcome to the latest and indeed the newest edition of the Food Systems Podcast, brought to you by the Forum for the Future of Agriculture. We're coming to you from our new studio here at the Press Club in Brussels, and what better way to start our new series than with the chairman of the Forum for the Future of Agriculture, Janez Potočnik. Janez, great to have you with us. You know, I mean, the word interesting in the English language has got many connotations and is often misused, but we do live in interesting, perhaps even tumultuous times. Give us your perspective on the extent of the progress that we're making in tackling climate change in particular. And as you do so, what's surprising you at the moment? What's concerning you, and where do we need to urgently act?
Yeah, hi Mark, it's a pleasure to have this recording with you. Good question, and of course, if you say interesting times, it's normally a kind of political expression for there is quite a lot of the things which are serious challenges around us. And you probably mentioned the one which is most critical. Climate change has, in recent decades, attracted a lot of policy attention with right reasons, but with quite limited success, if we are honest. Because only if we just open our eyes and look to the weather report forecasts, which is totally unpredictable, we see what is the time in which we are living. But let me share with you some basic facts. 2023 was the year when the CO2 emissions were on a global level the highest ever. In Europe, they went down, indeed. Second, we have reached already 1.5 degrees over the pre-industrial level, which was set as a target which we should not breach. But somehow we have behaved like this is the target we have to reach. Yeah. And in a way, I don't see many people really panicking about that. And the thing which is worrying me most in this respect is actually that fossil fuel subsidies in the last year, according to IMF, were 7.1% of global GDP, right, which is the highest figure ever. Yeah. So it will get worse. Get ready. I think all those data are showing that we are going in that direction. Maybe the best example for all those who really want to hear economic arguments is exactly my own country, Slovenia. So we were terribly hit last year by extreme weather events and at the end by flooding. And the government has just less than a month ago adopted a provision, a bill, how much they would compensate from the budget for what was happening in relation to the last summer. And it is it will be paid in 5 years indeed, but it is approximately 16.9% of 1 year Slovenian budget, which means you will have less money for education, less money for health, and less money for other things. It's a real economic challenge for any government, and this will pretty much repeat also in the future. If we look through the point of science, what we can find out, Potsdam Institute in April actually published the estimates that till 2050, next 25 years, we can expect a drop of income for approximately 22 or around 20% less in Europe and US and more in Africa. The Cambridge, US, published in May even more worrying figures, which are basically telling that 1 degree Celsius increase is actually impacting on, if I remember well, 12% of drop of GDP. So science is telling us that this is and it will be even more costly. And I think what is also pretty worrying for me is that NUPI, which is Norwegian Institute for International Affairs, has actually analyzed the energy educational decrease all over all the countries in the world and all universities. And 68% of them are still connected to the fossil fuels and 32% with renewable energy. So in short, attention which we are giving to energy transition, it's important. But energy transition plus the technological development, which some believe that is the overall and needed answer, will simply not be enough. So climate change is a symptom of ecological overshoot. And material footprint was till now dangerously under-discussed. So it's about how we use resources. It's about waste which we are creating. It's about the global population growth, at least in last decades. All that is contributing to the overshoot and to the stability which we have to deal with. And if I would be a bit provocative, then if you would provide us humans with abundant energy, cheap energy, all renewable energy, but do not ask questions for what this energy will be used. Do not ask the question of current behavior, overuse, wasteful behavior, and so on. You are actually giving us a license to kill. So I think it would be really important that we understand that we need to combine those strategies. Like Phil Hogan, one of environmental journalists, nicely summarized, the species which are causing the extinction of 100 species per day do not need more energy to do that. So these are, I think, the core crunches which we have to deal with when we deal with the climate story. So we need to combine three types of answers. So supply side, which is energy transition and basically everything which is connected with CO2 management. With demand side, which is actually behavior, decoupling economic growth from the resource use and environmental impacts, and nature-based solutions, which are currently very much underused. So on the last COP28, these questions finally came a bit more in the center of debate. But it was COP28, not COP1. And it came in the center of the debate more from the reason that if you look at only through energy optic, you simply do not find convincing answers for this transition which is needed. So yeah, a lot of good is happening, but I think it would be really important to broaden the strategy with which we are addressing the climate change to be effective.
I want to just pick up on one or two of the things that you said there. I mean, you said to me on the backside, you said in public places, we're at 1.5 degrees already. What you just described about the experience in Slovenia, the mitigation budget and that taking money away from education, health, and so forth. These consequences are being felt now. So why isn't there the panic in the street that you so rightly point to?
It's in a way surprising that there is no more panic. What we are probably not aware is that fixing climate change and environmental issues will not be like fixing COVID.
Yeah.
So it will need generations and decades. And the main reason, I think, is that our economic system is actually organized in a way that we profit from current moment, but we actually translate the cost to the future.
Yeah.
That's why I think that this behavior, it's absolutely unfair via the future generations. We are financially and also by depleting nature terribly indebting them. And this is more than technological choice. This is actually a moral choice.
Yeah.
And we are supposed to be apparently the most intelligent species on the planet. So it would be high time to prove it.
Yeah, well, quite right. I mean, let's talk about the political environment, the elections. We just obviously had the European Parliament elections. It is a year of elections. We've obviously just seen what's happened in France. The UK had its elections. The US has elections later in the year. Germany is next year. When you reflect on what we've just talked about, to what extent are you seeing some of what we're talking about reflected in the political debate? And then as we start to think about the Parliament's new mandate, what are the priorities that they should be setting now for tackling climate change, restoring the ecosystems? that stop that transition, that translation of costs today into the future?
Yeah, I would say the core assessment of everything which is around, which we also see then in the results in the elections, is that, you know, people, be it farmers, be it teachers, be it doctors, or retired people, if you want, we all aspire for a safe, predictable, secure future.
Sure.
And currently we are living in an environment where we are losing that safety. And whenever you lose that safety, you revert from a more longer term view to a current moment, trying to secure your moment here now, for you and for your family, of course. And that is, of course, leading also to less tolerant behavior, which we then see somehow landing in these elections in more extreme left or right positions. And of course, this is a situation which is quite dangerous, because politicians are not actually listen to that shout from the crowd, from the streets where also those people are going. And I think it's so many times they simply go to a kind of short-term crisis management, which actually led in the last month also in stepping back in some European Green Deal commitments which were done at the beginning. But my firm belief is that it's absolutely necessary to protect the vision which was set with the European Green Deal. In fact, many things happened in these 5 years, which I think we need to take into account. So we need to take into account a more social part of the angle, so more equity, because equity and environmental transformation are two sides of the same coin. We need to take into account, we need to go more to the actual base resource story. So for what and how we use resources. We need to go, of course, the question of competitiveness, it's an important question, but we have to be fair in assessment of the competitiveness. What is actually mainly causing that European economy is under competitiveness pressure? And of course, there are many things which one could mention. China strengthening, then of course also the war is in our neighborhood. There are many other things like also the structure of European economy, and in the first place the fragility of European economy, because we were major energy and resource importers and still are. So all that, and I haven't mentioned here greening or environment yet, but all that matters. And we honestly have to approach those questions and answer them, and then start to couple them with European Green Deal story. Of course, we need to take also into consideration the security situation, which has worsened in this time. But system thinking contributes also to the solution of security questions, not the opposite. So I think it would be pretty essential that we understand that the current tendency, which is currently here around floating in European circles, that we are somehow avoiding using the word European Green Deal. It's simply wrong. I think even it's dangerous. None of those things which I was mentioning before are the reasons for them. It's European Green Deal, not for the war, not for the China rising, not for any of those migrations and so on, which are politically in the center of attention. So if Europe will not stick to that, who will? If European Commission will not stick to that, who will? So I do believe that exactly those times actually ask for sometimes more clear and brave policy making, which is actually based on science. And sometimes, unfortunately, the statement that conductor, if you want to conduct the orchestra, need to turn the back to the audience, it's also in political context an important part of the solutions. So what is actually worrying me most after the elections, so I was relatively, so I think the election result was actually not bad. I think that the the core of moderate middle European parties are still very firmly in the position. What is worrying me are two things. One is if this core will keep their vision and not fall into the basket of temptations coming from left and right.
Right.
And second, of course, situation in two most important historically and also economically countries, France and Germany, in political sense, it's far from being stable. But if I conclude, I think in Europe, today we basically have two main avenues in which we could go. One is more going defensive, so acknowledging the reality in security side. Part of that is then the policies which we are already seeing as more political decisions related to enlargement and increasing safety valve of the European Union, which I firmly support, of course. But this will not address some of the core questions which I have seen very much around in this Brussels space in the last 20 years, which is we are the number 2 market globally, we are the major global donor, but when it comes to geostrategical voice, we are not heard appropriately. But if we want to be really appropriately heard, then I think it's pretty essential that in three areas, fiscal policy, foreign policy, and security policy, we more join our forces and move one step further. Because if you will, I immediately hear the answer, but not in this situation, but not this member state. But if this would be the way how the founding fathers of European Union would approach to creation, we would never have European Union in the first place. So I think it's really, really important that we start to understand that the way how we are, for example, using today tax policy that is competing each member state against other member state and together complaining that we are not competitive out with the other countries out of Europe, that is not actually the way to go. And it would be really important to understand that tax policy is the major market tool which we can use. So taxing more the things which we would like less, taxing less the things we would like more, using state subsidies only for a purpose of transition, using public procurement with a purpose, not just to get sometimes some rubbish which is the cheapest on the market. And of course, getting rid of tax havens which are still even in Europe existing. So there is a lot of opportunities. It is a critical moment, but and we need to look ahead, not to look back, and not to put the head in the sand.
I mean, just before we move on to what the implications that might be for the agri-food sector, I mean, there are some that have said without those changes to the competencies for fiscal policy, for security policy, for foreign policy, it's like driving a car with a handbrake on. Europe can never achieve its full potential. If that's true, how confident are you that we can begin to get convergence across those three areas? And I don't want to push you to put a time frame on that, but do you think we can get there?
Certainly, I believe it would be the right direction. But what I have learned in my political life is if you believe in something, you have to repeat it. It will not happen immediately. Far from that. So you will definitely be in many days frustrated. But then suddenly the things happen, the change happen, and you basically don't know why. But it's really the understanding, the snowball effect, that everything, that all other alternatives are out of the table if you want to be a serious strategic player. I think that start to work. So if I would directly answer your question, I'm not too optimistic in the short run, but that doesn't mean that I will not repeat those things. And that's exactly how one has to behave in the life. Do not have bad nights because of the things on which you can't impact, but not give up either.
And if we think also about the things that have just happened in the last 5 years that changed the trajectory of many things. I mean, very sadly, the conflict in Ukraine, the COVID pandemic is making us to think differently than perhaps what we did back in 2019. We'll see what the next 5 years or so bring. Let me bring it back to the agri-food sector, in particular, and we've talked a lot about the opportunities in the past, the challenges of the sector making the transition. We know that there's been this sense that farmers and land managers aren't feeling like they're getting a fair deal out of the system, that it's difficult, as they say, to go green when you're in the red. We saw the protests here. When you survey the landscape, reflecting on some of the things that you've just said, what do you think it does mean for the agri-food sector, and where is it going to need to put its focus and attention over the next 5 years or so?
Yeah, there are some things which are more difficult, and then are some things which are easier. So, starting point for me, it's always farmers deserve a fair award for their work, and they deserve, like anybody else, a kind of stable and secure future. That they don't feel it like that currently, and that's why I guess they are many times also in front of Berlaymont and on other streets here around. I think if I would say there are some elephants in the room which are difficult to be addressed. For example, if we say we have to go local, we have to go regional, we have to go seasonal with the food production. But on the other hand, we need to. We know that Europe is one of the main protectors of the globalization and of the free trade policy and so on. And of course, if then you add to that also environmental requirements, safe, secure food, this is sometimes a bit in contradiction. I'm not saying that. I just think that we need to be really we need fine crafting to find the proper solution in that area. The second is that on one hand, we all agree that externalities needs to be priced in, also when it comes to the food production. But on the other hand, food, so there needs to be the food security. Everybody would need to have access to food. That's more than obvious. That's why, while everybody talks about externalities and importance to talk about the full cost, on the other hand, the governments are pretty much interested to keep the prices of food low.
Yeah.
So, and the third is, of course, the rules which exist in the food chain, and the relatively unfair distribution across the food chain. So, farmers have relatively strong political power, which we have seen on the streets and also through the reaction of politicians.
Yeah.
But they don't have a real market power. So market power, it's more in the hands of big industry, which doesn't have so much political power. Sometimes it's also using the power of farmers to somehow protect their own interests. And I think that they will need simply to ask a question: how much of the profits is simply good enough? Because I think this more fair distribution, where the pressure at the end is coming on the farmer, it's simply something which is causing a lot of instability to the farmers too. But as I mentioned at the beginning, there are also quite some areas where the level of agreement is much higher. So, for example, regenerative agriculture direction, sustainable practices, which would on one hand look at the level of production, productivity, but on the other hand, protection of soil, protection of water, protection of everything which is connected with sustainable agriculture. Then in the terms of providing farmers with solid economic outcomes, I think it's really important what signals they will be getting from the market. And in that respect, common agriculture policy will be pretty critical, how we will design it for the future. Then it's absolutely also adopting everything what is coming new from AI, from satellites and so on, which could help also strengthening sustainability. And there is also not a lot of dispute around that. And of course, there is also a high level of agreement that there should be an incentive should be coming also from the consumer side, because consumers are the ones who are not only given the signals from the market, but are also giving the signals to the market. And I think more responsible behavior from their side would also help that this transition would happen. So there are not many of really easy questions. But, I'm really afraid of the moment when the same farmers will be on the streets in front of Berlin shouting, "Stop the climate change." Because we see that the consequences of that weather event, the consequences of the fact that this water cycle gets entirely disturbed, are in the first place falling on them, on their arms, on their shoulders. And they absolutely deserve the help. But we can't spend all the money on adaptation. We have to actually understand that prevention should be dominating policy if we want to avoid that it will get terribly worse.
Well, I mean, when I listen to you, and we've talked about this in other places, we're really talking about systemic change, and by that I mean there's no one actor that has the silver bullet here. And in many ways, that's what makes it so hard, because it's not you don't do A and you get B. I mean, do you have any sense of how we do orchestrate both public and private actors to act differently, to deliver the kind of change that we want? And maybe within that, and perhaps it's a stretch, but you are the chairman of the forum, what can the forum do to help? What's the forum's role in this?
I think that the thing which you mentioned, that more systemic approach, is pretty critical in everything. So in our recent International Resource Panel report, which I'm co-chairing, that's a kind of UN initiative which is dealing with responsible natural resource management, we came to the conclusion, of course, which is not so difficult, that the current economic system, which was championed from industrial part of the world, is wasteful and unfair, and that it would be pretty critical that we move, that we actually set the order right. Economy is there to help the people and not the opposite. So how we can meet human needs in most resource and energy efficient way, not how we can maximize the amount of products and services which we put in certain sector on the market, measured through the GDP. So it should be well-being guiding us. And I think it's really important that we start at the base of the house which we are building, because if the base is not solid, then the house which is built on that will never be solid. When it comes to the forum, so you know that our role was always bringing different side of, so bringing different actors in the same room, creating a space where we would listen to each other, even if we do not agree, where we would give a space to everybody to express, and that this would hopefully lead to new ideas, to the new solutions. And in the last years, when I took the chairmanship, we actually moved very much in the direction that from European we went also to global, that from few partners we actually wanted really to extend the partnership and funding related. So the recent partners which are joining, NEBU, Renature and Microsoft, are again, I think, a really important addition to the forum development and quality. And of course, we also wanted to move from only looking to agriculture to the whole food chain, also to the partners in the whole food chain. And the recent additions from the forum, which are basically how we would move from somebody who talks to somebody who is more also a doer. So in this call for action, which was just recently published, and I think there are some good news included, and you can find it also on our homepage, that this is clearly showing a sign that we are serious about that, and that we really want to move in that direction, even if we know that it will not be easy. And one thing which I also believe that we are one of the rare spaces which still exist there in Brussels, it's trying to create that space to bridge the divide, which is many times existing still between the extreme views, which are somehow excluding and just searching for what the others think differently. Instead, they would actually define where we can agree, where we have to move together ahead. And I sincerely hope that here Forum could play a major role. By the way, we have also nominated recently the new advisory council, which should help us in this respect, as well as also helping us creating the strategic vision, and by the way, help with the connections which they are bringing to us. And I think we are on a good way to be to just from somebody who was just once per year trying to organize a good conference where people would meet, to a space where actually during the whole period of time we esteem for good changes and for development in the direction which certainly would not be reached only by coming together once per year and then starting to organize the next conference.
No, I fully agree with that. Yeah, as I'm pleased you mentioned the call to action annual report, which I think, I mean, it's our first year since we launched it, and I think there are grounds for optimism in there. But I think we would also recognise, as you and I have talked, that it's a first step, and it's how we build on it that is the case. And certainly we continue to welcome feedback and additions on that. As we kind of start to conclude our conversation today, I mean, you've touched on it a little bit as we've talked through the various issues, challenges, etc., opportunities. We're almost at the summer break. What does give you cause for optimism? What is beyond the obvious keeping you awake at night? And what should our homework be over the summer so that when we come back here in August, late August, early September, we're really ready to hit the ground running?
Yeah, I will basically mention both what gives me reasons for optimism and actually what is raising my concerns. So one thing is clear: it's difficult nowadays to be science-based and optimistic.
Right.
Yeah. So my major concern currently in this space is actually exactly that this simplistic logic of greening, it's not good for economics, which it's an easy scapegoat, would somehow again start to be part of our conversation. So the situation is, I know the situation is difficult, but it's much more complex. And this easy way will simply bring us into a very, very dangerous zone in which we currently already are. So I would really plead to all, please don't do that mistake, because this will set us decades, if not generation back, and maybe there will be some tipping points which we will not be able to return back to normal. What would be our homework for the summer? I would say take a good rest in the first place, because when you are rested, your mind starts to be more refreshed, and get rid of this daily bombarding which we are getting, and manipulation, if I can say that, from daily news, polarizations, and so on. And don't fall, all of us, into a trap which is probably best explained by a statement from one of the comics, Alan Ford, which I'm reading recently quite a lot, which goes something like that. Folks, you are living in a free country. Nobody can force you to think with your own head if you don't want to. Yeah. No, take vacations that you will think with your own head, and look around, look a bit also. Sometimes we are so careful and caring when we look to our children and their children, and we should simply not forget that when we go back to our regular life. So bring a bit of this intimacy which we have in a logic in families to our daily workable life. What gives me major optimism? Listen, I think that with everything what we said, the critical mass of people who understand and are actually committed to change is increasing. It's increasing a lot. It's increasing quickly. And we should never forget that it's actually optimists who change the world. So my final word would be that this optimism should be very much based also on the personal level, because if you will be optimist, you will live definitely longer and better. So optimism should stay with us, but at the same time, I think it's important that we somehow look constantly into the mirror of reality and use that optimism to change the picture in the mirror.
A great rallying cry for vacation time and indeed beyond. Janez, it's been a pleasure as always talking to you, you know that. I do also just want to say thank you for everything that you do for the forum and also for all your wider activities on these topics. It's hugely appreciated, and sometimes we don't stop to say thank you. So thank you. Thank you also for helping to launch this new concept of the Food Systems Podcast and giving your time so generously to be with us today.
Thanks, Mark. It was a pleasure, and take good vacations.
Certainly will do. And thank you for listening and perhaps even watching this latest edition of the Food Systems Podcast. My name is Mark Titterington and I've been your host today. Join us again next time. For now, cheerio.